we're going to take a look at Talon, GMT game. Part of the purpose of this is a space combat game. This is actually the second printing, which surprises me because of one factor. I thought they had fixed this by the second printing. First thing off, if you're looking for a good explanation, introduction to the rules, whatever, this is not what you want to see. This is an exploration of the rules more than anything else. I know this is kind of a popular game. People might be looking to it for that. I know other videos to handle that, so I do not have to worry too much about that. Although I am going to go through the rules in the introduction because it provides us with, well, there's two reasons. One, it provides a context to people who are going to view my playthrough, view my review, whatever, as to, you know, where I'm coming from and what I think of the rules as I'm reading them. I have read them before, but I haven't internalized them. I've only played a very introductory scenario, this little one that's meant to just highlight, roll a couple of dice, you know, see what's going on. Okay, what about my view of the game? Well, when I first saw it, I said, oh, cool, a modernized space combat game. I'm kind of interested. I was especially interested in the fact that it links in with SE4X. What the hell? What is it called? I don't remember what its actual name is. I'm so used to calling it that. Space Empires 4X. A GMT, kind of interesting game. It's a sort of a revamping of kind of the Stellar Conquest type of design. And yeah, I've kind of soured on it because people play it by the way that it's supposed to be played instead of the more Stellar Conquest type way, which is for total conquest. If you play it by the sort of basic victory conditions that are a little potentially shorter, you can win the game with a first strike against one player. You don't have to wipe everybody out or anything like that. You can get situations where, yeah, sure, you won, but how long are you going to survive after your quick stab victory? Not that Stellar Conquest can't be won that way, and I'm sure SE4X can also be won that way, but you can't go all out on it. Anyway, when I started reading some of the information about this, I grew a lot more lukewarm about it, in the sense of, I think some hints were coming out that it didn't really integrate with SE4X, and I see the why behind that, and that it's kind of a limited looking game. My impression at this point is that, well, let me skip forward a little bit. So anyway, GMT came back with their fall sale, and I'm like, okay, I'm willing to buy it, you know, under those conditions. It's probably the best thing GMT does in terms of selling games. It's not like these games are terribly cheaper than you can get maybe from an online retailer or something like that. But somehow there's this, I pre-ordered some things, and in fact, pre-orders are linked to the idea of the sale too. I ought to take advantage of everything that I can get my hands on cheap from the fall sale. And so it creates this spiral of me getting way too many GMT games, and so it's a great marketing. It's a great marketing tool for them, and it definitely has worked on me at least. Okay, so my impressions from looking through the rules are that this is kind of a stripped down SFB type system. It's got, you know, some modifications to maybe aid play, but I'm not sure how much they really do. And it's got, you know, it's fairly limited in terms of the number of weapon systems it has available to kinds of ships. It only has two races involved in it, which immediately you're saying, well, wait a minute, SE4X is like basically a 4-player game. What? Yeah, it doesn't exactly support SE4X. What it does is it can be used with an SE4X map to create the war that this represents. But you have another option for that, which is sort of like a Starfleet. Starfleet Battles had sort of a grand campaign game that was just baked into it from really pretty early on. I know the designer's edition had it already. I never saw the little first book. Where you're basically fighting in sectors and working your way towards the enemy homeworld. Well, here they have a nice graphic representation of something very similar to that. And indeed, in a lot of ways, this game is very, very similar to a stripped-down basic game of Starfleet Battles. Now, the basic game of Starfleet Battles, nobody plays it because the people who got hooked on Starfleet Battles got really hooked, and largely the game just blew up into something humongous with, geez, I don't know. I mean, there's like 8 major races, several other minor things, 3 or 4 at least, that are like not really fleets, but you can encounter these. And almost every race has its own weapon system, and certainly they all have their own ship designs that are all locked in. Now, one of the other things that would have appealed to me is if you could build your own ships. You kind of build your own ships in SE4X, but yeah, they're limited to certain classes and they don't go into a lot of details. I would have been happy with something that allowed you to design your own ships a la, say, Traveler Space Combat, where you could configure and try out, or kind of like Car Wars or something like that. Not that you make spaceships in Car Wars. I wouldn't be surprised if they put it there. They have planes, boats, everything else. But anyway, you know, something along those lines where you kind of build your ships to your own liking to suit your own tactics and your style. Well, no, this doesn't do that. This has locked-in ship designs of its own, and they're really very limited. This is basically, there's one counter for each. You know, each ship has a counter, basically. And these are your bases. Okay. So given all that, and the hints of this that were coming out as I read it, along with the fact that it uses non-vector movement, just like SFB, that it doesn't use 3 dimensions, which may be okay. I'm not sure how much 3 dimensions really helps. I kind of said, you know, I'm not sure how much it's going to add. And then I held off and eventually picked it up, right? Okay. I was mostly right from what I can see about those impressions. And so, you know, whatever. Let's see what we get out of it. Okay. And there's at least one expansion pack for this, which is still limited, but you know, is showing that, hey, this could go the same way SFB did. But honestly, if you pick up like the old designer's edition of SFB, or even before that, the old little book, and stick just to that, you've actually got something that's a little richer than this in terms of the number of races, the number of configurations of fleets and stuff like that that you can do. So you're getting a lot less here. What you are getting is somewhat more modern, easy to use play aids, and actually a stripped down and even more simplified system. So the old SFB, the most basic version of it had like an 8 impulse chart, I think. I don't remember. This has a 6 impulse chart, you know, where you're only making moves 6 times per turn. But this does provide you with some options in terms of some slight differences for it. So like in SFB, you had to plot out your energy expenditure. That's gone from this. This has worked out something, and this is, I think, the designer's main addition to the concept, where power comes online and you use it immediately. And you use it to charge up your weapons over time. You use it to do other things as well, which is kind of interesting. One of the other big changes, which I don't know how well it works, is you write directly on the counters. This means you have to pull up the counter, mark it off, and then try to put it back where it belongs, which, you know, you can do, but as you take actions, you write on the counter. Now, there is an option to use paper instead, and I think very quickly you're going to see that the paper works a little bit better. One of the reasons it works a little bit better is even here in the second printing, these little markers, they don't write on here. On the bright side, a China marker works just fine, and that's fine. Now, it's not that these markers are defective. They write fine on the plastic here. They erase perfectly fine. The counters just don't have the correct kind of lamination to do that. My understanding is that the expansion provides you with counters that do take the pen a little better, but I'm not sure that's really the case because this is the second printing. Why did they not correct that in here? So maybe the first printing had even worse counters that like you couldn't dry erase at all, and that these, they don't mark at all. However, they do mark up just fine with the China marker, like I said. So if you want to mark on the counters, you can do that. There might be some problems with using paper. So for example, let's see, you can write the power curve on here. You've got different weapons groups listed here. You would have to set up the charts kind of like you do in what I just did, and why I just did Blue Max over there was because I hadn't quite clipped all the counters for this, and I was like, you know, it's a similar kind of thing, right? What you have to do for your ships, instead of having individual SSDs like you do in an SFB game, here you have to match what your ship's capabilities are from the counter onto the sheet, and obviously that's somewhat disturbing. You know, it would probably be pretty easy though to draw up some paper replicas of these suckers, and somebody may have already done that, so that you just have little SSD type things that handle each ship individually. And then you wouldn't have to actually rely on these generic sheets that you'd have to modify, but you'd have specific charts for each ship, maybe that you could just paste on top of the top part of it, or just, you know, have your orders here. Those orders are very, very limited. There isn't a lot that you control in terms of what you're using your power for, and I'll explain how that works in a little bit. What do you have other than the ships? Well, you have a bunch of counters here. These are for reinforcing shields. They give a little bit of extra information. These are for the campaign game. These are to represent, I don't know. They're different states in your ship, basically, like shields down. These are, you know, critical effects and stuff like that. There's also damaged equipment that can be jury-rigged, and special rules for that. These are to mark. One of the other clever things in this, which is this game, so SFB had kind of a pure simultaneous thing, where on an impulse, if you had to move, both people moved at the same time, more or less. There was some pulsing to it within that, where I think you didn't have, where one person got to go before the other based on their speed and stuff like that. But firing was simultaneous and secretly decided and stuff like that. Here we have a true first and second player. What these are going to do is reflect an ability to change who the first and second player are. You have missiles, which are the equivalent of drones in SFB, one of the few weapon types in this game. We'll go over the rest here. You have these little turn markers. Now, I don't know what the number in it is. I think that may be the radius that you're actually turning, which is kind of unimportant. What would be more valuable is to link it directly to a ship. But there's only 4 numbers, and those are kind of the turn radiuses you have. This is, again, another critical. What else do you have here? Oops. These are, I guess, objective markers for some of the scenarios. I didn't look into it too much. You get these dice, which are kind of crappy dice for a GMT game. Seem to be reducing their quality of dice that they're able to order, which is fine, you know. I mean, you get a couple of dice that you can carry in the game, and it's not like, you know, we don't all have enough dice, and you probably choose your own kind of favorite style of die, so I don't really care. It's been nice. So GMT generally packs large, high precision rounded dice that are kind of expensive, honestly, and more expensive than I like. And they're just, I don't like the larger dice in general, so these, if they're going to give me large dice, I'm fine with them giving me cheaper large dice, even though the other ones are kind of cool. I wouldn't use them. So what do you have for play aids? Well, other than the things I pointed out, you have here a list of the different ships and some information about them, notably including their power curve. And that's going to be very, very important, because this is the one thing you get to kind of select, is how much of your energy goes towards movement and how much goes towards other things. And that's reflected in 3 pieces of information: the amount of energy, the amount of movement, and then your turn radius. And your turn radius is based on, you know, how much speed, how much energy you're putting towards movement. The more you put towards movement, the harder it is to turn your ship, because you're going faster. It takes more pulses to turn your ship, basically, more movement actions. You have the weapons charts, and you can see there's not a lot of different weapons in this. The old SFB filled a full sheet of paper with the weapons charts for the original, and I mean, we're talking the designer's edition here, and then it got much, much more complicated as the game expanded. And then you got a little critical hits chart here. Instead of the whole, oh wow, I'm gonna roll up each shot and see what it does, which I always kind of liked, but it mechanically was very challenging. Your ships are only gonna record damage on one little sheet of hull damage. You have shields here. They work much like the SFB ones do. And then you have, uh-oh, I haven't erased everything on this ship. You have these charging boxes for weapons groups. And then you have a few special things. Oh, there's things that are also on here. So here you write your power curve down, 3 numbers: the energy, the movement, and your turn radius. And these are charging boxes that, as you spend energy, one way or another, your weapons get to recharge from it. And then there's special things that each race has. They also have some differences in weaponry. The Terrans have batteries, which, if they charge them up, are then a point of that sort of excess power, stuff you didn't use for movement, that you can throw in on any impulse that you're not already getting an excess power for. So they allow you to do a little bit more flexibility towards charging weapons or other things that are important. And because the Talon player, for which the game is named, doesn't have batteries, they have these afterburners, which are special one-shot during the scenario, able to do something a little bit more for the movement, which we'll look at. They're able to power a little bit more movement than they can normally do. And the ships are a little asymmetrical. One of my understandings is the Talon has a stronger front shield, and their sides and rear are a little bit weaker proportionally than the Terran ships, and that's to go with a certain design philosophy, you know, baked into the race. All right, let's dig into the rules themselves. This is probably where you want to drop off, unless you're interested in me looking through, learning, and critiquing the rules at the same time. Like I said, I've read them, I kind of understood them, but clipping the counters got me a certain way. It got me away from it enough that I do really need to read through them again. Oh, I didn't go over this item. So this is also another element of the play aids. It keeps the impulse track, which indicates who goes when. And like I said, it's got an initiative and a second player. The initiative is determined through the use of power points, actually. And then it's got other phases in the turn. After you do the actual impulses, you go through a power phase where you get some charging opportunities. Reinforcements can come on the map. You can retreat from the battle, and then otherwise you can count the number of rounds you have, and some things to help you understand what you can do during your turn. And it would actually be kind of helpful for each player to have one of these in front of them, but I guess it's okay to share it. Okay, and let's go through the sequence of play. I kind of already have here. The first thing that happens is each player goes through the 6 impulses, and first the initiative player, then the second player does each of these. And the first thing they do is, if they have any shield reinforcement markers that are due to expire. Now what you have is a letter on here. The turn the impulse that you place this on, it's marked there, and it'll go away at the beginning of your initiative of that next impulse. So you get the reinforcement point that you put into the shield for an entire turn, no matter when you fire off that reinforcement point. Again, this is similar to what SFB does, but without that artificial structure of you can only power things up during the course of, during your energy allocation phase. There's nothing artificial like the energy allocation phase in this, which I think is actually a big advance. That I found an unbelievable piece of the game, and I like what they've done for that. Then, if you have an action point this impulse for one of your ships, you can spend that in order to do whatever you can do with that, and that's listed here, the different things that you can do with it. Then you must move each of your ships that are programmed by their power profile to move. Now, the way that's handled is, let's take a look at a power profile. Let's say, let's not take that. Let's take a heavy cruiser because they're kind of standard. This is the standard power profile for the Talon heavy cruiser. So it has a power curve of 3 and 3 for it gets APs on 3 and it gets movement on 3. What that means is if a 3 shows up on one of these, it gets the ability to do that on that phase. So on phase B, on your initiative, you get to spend an AP and you get to move forward if you've chosen that particular power profile. There is a little bit of falseness, a little bit of that artificiality of the energy allocation that happens because you can only change your power curve during the power phase, which happens in sort of an interface between the impulses. But it's much lighter than the effect that you have in SFB, where you have to allocate everything you're going to do in the turn ahead of time, minus some battery power that you have in reserve. Okay. Then you're allowed to fire any of your weapons groups that are fully charged, and you fire all the weapons from that group. You can choose not to, but they're wasted. And then you're allowed to repair critical damage, which is something special. Okay. Then you continue. Then the second non-initiative player gets to go, and then you repeat this through B through F, that whole sequence of the impulsing. Okay, then you get to the power phase, and here you're allowed to charge one of your red boxes in each weapons group, or you can passively charge the yellow boxes on your records group, and I believe that's all your yellow boxes get charged if you do that. Every ship's power curve, and you'll see what that means is generally the weapons recharge at a certain rate, but you can speed it up just a little bit, which seems to work pretty well, in my opinion. And then you're allowed to change your power curve by one level on here. So for example, if I was at this 332, I could go up to the 242, where I'm moving a little faster, or down to the 421, where I'm moving a little slower and have a little bit excess power. You have to make your decision. How much does speed matter in this game? Maneuverability tends to mean a lot in SFB, but okay. And the initiative player makes his choices in the open before the second player makes his choices. So there's a lot less secret information going on here. And then you might get some reinforcements on the board, and you might be able to leave the battle entirely if you follow certain, if you meet certain requirements. Okay, let's see if there's anything exciting here. Okay, one of the things you can do during when you spend AP is you can change initiative, and you do that by marking. If you have APs on a ship to spend, you can put an AP to either change or to defend the initiative. This ends up being a bidding war. Whoever's going to have the most ships at the end of an impulse that go one way or the other affect it. Basically, if more ships have change allocated due to expending AP, then, and no, not analysis paralysis, then have defend, the initiative order changes and the other player becomes the initiative. Well, yeah, the initiative order changes and this counter flips over and now we have a different player will become first. And that is checked in between each impulse. So it's quite possible that you can flip the impulse order around. And this is kind of this is one of the more innovative things in it, is this concept. And I think that's just really what the designer did, was said, okay, I can strip away some of the mechanical complexity of like an SFB type game with a couple little tweaks and leave most of the rest of the core in place. And then, hey, instead of just, you know, writing up a mod for the game, for the game, let's make the whole game. Yeah, why not? Okay. Those go away in between impulses, so if you burn them for no use, they're just a waste of power. Oh, we've talked a little bit about these things. The weapons groups. So weapons groups are aligned. Let me show you. So this is a weapons group with one weapon in it. This is a weapons group with one weapon in it. This is a weapons group with one weapon in it. We have weapons groups with multiple weapons, though. Unlike this bigger ship, it has two phaser weapons. The way you tell it's a phaser is by looking on here. These both become charged by this, and basically it just gets two shots out of these arcs, which are front and to the side. On the other side, it has the same thing. Over here, it has the wave motion gun, which is kind of potent. That's only one weapons group. There's only one weapon there, but they've split off the two. They've split off the yellows just to fit into the counter better, and that's how that works. What the hell is this thing? That thing is antimatter torpedoes, which is the same weapon as exists here. And obviously, if they were to add lots of races and everything, it would be hard to do it just with iconography. So in a sense, you can see the decision to do this, to represent the ships with iconography in such a way, is perhaps limiting the size of what this game could eventually become in terms of, you know, if it could expand more deeply. On the hull boxes, you have some information here. So the minus here is an indication of an effect on your speed. This is an indication of a critical hit, which means when you reach that box, you take a critical hit damage. With the speed boxes, that's an indication of a penalty that you now have taken on your speed. And unfortunately, when you mark that off, there's an issue there. So let's see if we have that. We don't have that marked right here. So we'll take a look and see if that's a little different elsewhere. Okay. Like in SFB, you have arcs for the different shielding and for the weapons. And right and left are bigger arcs in this than forward and rear. Not tremendously bigger, but a little bigger. And that might affect some things a little bit. It reduces the need for all kinds of complex arcs that SFB has into something pretty simple. You can go right, left, forward, and rear, and those are your only options. There's nothing, you know, more detailed than that. You write your power curve down on the bottom of the counter in such a way, and I don't have that written. And you're going to have to erase that regularly. Paper towel works fine, at least with the China markers. I found with at least with SFB when I used something similar on plastic coverings for the SSDs, I had to kind of dampen things to clean when I used dry erase markers as opposed to the China marker. We'll find where that rule is actually mentioned. But you can't choose a speed that would give you negative power, which is important. If your power is less than 0, your ship falls apart. Okay. All right. Whenever you get an action point, remember, that is, here in the sequence, that is the first thing you do is you remove your expired shield defenses. Second thing you do is you get to spend your APs that you have, and you could use a battery if you're the Terrans to generate one if you didn't get one. So if you get one on a ship, you can do the following things. You can enable a side slip. You put a marker for side slips. What the hell are those? I think those may be these. Let's see. No, that's a turn marker. Oh, there we go. Side slip is on the back of the turn radius markers. It's one of these suckers. And that just indicates that you have the capacity to do a side slip, which when you maneuver will allow you to go like this instead of straight forward. And it doesn't affect your turn radius or anything at all. Okay. You can power through a turn. If you've got a turn radius out here, or out here even, you can move it one closer to your ship by expending an AP. And you're just tightening up how your turn radius goes. You can charge a single yellow box on a weapons group thing, in which case you mark one of the yellow boxes and your weapon becomes a little bit more charged up. You can charge a battery. If your battery is not charged, you can put a mark in it to indicate it's got power in it. You can reinforce a shield arc. For the impulse that you're in, you pick the correct letter, and you put it on a certain shield arc, and you say, okay, I've got an extra point of shielding. And that'll be the first one lost. You can only do this once per arc, and I think you're only allowed 2 total on your counter, but I don't remember for sure. You can place a change or defend initiative marker by spending an AP. If you're a carrier or a base, you can give AP to fighter squadrons. Now, in general, this goes on a per fighter basis, but there's certain things that go to the entire squadron because it operates as a single counter. Where something affects the whole counter, like movement, it generally goes to the whole counter. If it's a shielding advantage or something like that, it goes to a single ship. Well, I don't know if shielding can be increased on those. If you have missiles on the board, you can select new targets for those missiles by spending an action point. Okay. I told you about the reinforcements. Yeah, you're only allowed 2 present on any one ship, and they expire a full sequence of impulses, a full round after you placed it during your turn. Movement and turning. There's 3 kinds of movement. Going straight, you just move straight. If you move onto your turn radius marker, you get rid of your turn radius marker and you're capable of turning from then on. You could do a turn. A turn is basically 1 hex side and then you move. And then the side slip, if you have a side slip marker on your ship, you can expend that and perform a side slip. Can you side slip and turn? No, I don't believe you can. I believe you're only allowed 1 of those. No? Yeah. They say it's independent of the turn radius, so I'm not sure that you can't do both. I don't see a disallowance there, but I can't guarantee anything to it because they are separated as 3 different types of movement. You're only allowed to do one of the following, so I would say probably you can't do both. Okay. If a ship moves into the hex as another ship of its same race, both ships take 3 points of damage to their shield facing. You do not get a collision with enemy ships, though. There's no ramming in this. If a fighter collides with a friendly ship, each fighter in the squadron takes the 3 damage. So the entire squadron will be destroyed. The opposing ship also takes its damage. The map floats, which means we can scroll it as needed. And we've got parts of the map. It comes in 2 pieces. There's a little half map here, so you could presumably widen the map where need be, I guess. That might be hard. I think these will actually fit together too. They say to only connect them here, but I think you could actually fit top to bottom or something like that. We'll see. However, if there's a ship 6 or more hexes away from the nearest other ship and it is going to be removed from play on a shift in order to allow the things to exist, it has retreated. How you determine that in particular, that might generate some arguments. So try to avoid that unless you mean to get away. And terrain will also shift with the map as needed. Terrain can shift off the map and then it's gone forever. You don't try to keep track of where it is. Okay. Like I said, for firing, a weapon group has to be charged in order to fire it. And you mark off the charges as you accumulate them. And once it's fully charged, you can fire from then on. Yellow boxes can actively be charged by spending AP or passively charged during the power phase. Red boxes can only be charged during the power phase. You normally begin with all your boxes marked, ready to fire. You pick your weapon. You may select different targets for weapons within the same group. You can only fire within your firing arc. You can't fire at your own ships intentionally. You can hit them accidentally. And no fire can happen between ships or missiles in the same hex. Planets can block fire, but ships do not block fire. You erase the group charge bar for that weapon, and then you roll each weapon on this little chart to see how much damage it does. Some weapons, like this, the phasers do an amount, surprising, do an amount of damage based on the die roll that you generate. Others, like the torpedo, you roll it to hit and it just does damage. Same with the wave motion gun. The disruptor, if it hits, it just does 2 damage. Disruptor, I think, is the common weapon for these guys. I have real trouble reading the iconography. Oh, crappy eyes. So damage. If damage hits a shield that's up, it's going to remove a point of shield for each point of damage that's done. Once it gets through the shield, it removes a point of hull for each damage it does. And any fire going through that shield, again, will cause damage. If there's a modifier in the leftmost hull box, it has that modifier for the power phase. So this is kind of interesting. The number that's on here, if you have filled the numbers to the left, like this, you now are penalized by 1 power. And there's a -1 on the critical hit. That's in addition to the effect of the critical hit, because you see the -1 just continues. Okay, when you take a critical hit, you roll the dice and you see what happens to you, and that's special effects that happen. When all your hull is gone, you're removed from the game. And when your ship is destroyed, it'll explode. The explosion value of the ship is listed as per the ship class, and it does that much damage to every ship adjacent to it, and any in the same hex take 1 extra point of damage on a random shield arc. You take it on the appropriate shield arc if you're adjacent. Order of explosion is done by the ship's owners. This could have an effect in terms of chain affecting. Fighters never cause explosion damage when they're destroyed. If fighters or missiles are in the proximity of an explosion, however, the damage is only applied to one of the fighters in the squadron or 1 missile in the hex. The owner gets to choose which one's damaged. They say destroyed. I'm not sure it's always destroyed, because some of these ships don't do a lot of damage. Some critical damage can be repaired if it has the repairable damage icon. Only critical damage that has an icon is repairable. To attempt the damage, you roll a 6-sided die. If you get a 6, the critical is removed. Repairs can be attempted at the end of every turn, thus every impulse. following the impulse in which the ship took critical damage. It may not be repaired in the impulse in which it is placed on the ship, even if you're the later player. Okay. I need to swap out batteries, and we've got more rules to go. Okay. During the power phase itself, if no red box needs to be marked off, you can mark off a number of yellow boxes equal to the number of weapons in that group. Okay, so that's a little different than I thought. I thought you could mark the whole list off. Which means with something like this that gets too, and I'm not sure why, I guess these weapons take longer to charge because the group's bigger, so they have more yellow boxes, and that's kind of the idea here. So in the first power phase, you can mark off one red box, and the only way you can mark off red boxes is during the power phase. So that leads a minimum recycling time. It's going to take one, like this, it's going to take one turn to charge this up, plus a number of boxes, a number of turns equal to the boxes on there, because there's only one weapon in the group. But this one, it takes one full turn to charge the red, but then to do the yellow as well, each turn you get 2 of them, so it'll take a total of 3 turns to charge those disruptors up. But if you use action points, you can speed that up. And if you have enough power cycling through your ship, you can actually charge your weapons up much, much faster. But that means you won't be moving. Then you get to adjust your power curve, and that's by picking a new one here. And that's about it. Okay. Batteries and afterburners. The Terrans have batteries. It's 1 AP that you can use on an impulse when you don't have an AP to use. And you erase it to mark your battery off. At the beginning of the battle, you probably will not have your battery charged. You have to spend an AP to charge it up for use later. Clearly something you want to do early in the scenario, but often you probably are going to be in a position where you want to spend your AP to do something. But there might be times when it's useful to just drop it into the battery. In SFB, you always charge your batteries to full, well, almost always, simply because you have no idea what you want to use your emergency power for. You may not need all your weapons charged. You may not need the shield reinforcements you're planning on, but you can always fire your battery off when you need it. So it's almost always worth doing. How do the afterburners work? So that's these little things. And on an impulse where you're not scheduled to move, you can mark it off to move a hex. You follow all rules normally for movement. You can side slip, you can turn as per all other rules. But once it's marked off, you cannot use it again. And you can only use 1 per impulse. So you will never be able to move more than 1 hex in a given impulse. That's the basic rules. I played the tutorial scenario. There's more scenarios you can probably do with just the basic rules, not many. On to the advanced rules. You're allowed to retreat from battle. Now, in order to do this, you have to get your FTL drive spooled up. Ooh. And then during the power phase of a given round, you can leave the battle. And you just leave if you're eligible and you wish to. In order to spool up your FTL, it's the power phase of the round number equal to the ship's total hull boxes. And this is initial hull boxes. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. By round 6, this ship could leave. That's all there is to it. Smaller ships can leave faster. Larger ships take a longer time to get out of there. What does this mean? You can't leave your smaller ships behind to defend yourself and get out of there quicker or anything like that. You can't retreat if you're in a nebula or asteroid. Bases can't retreat. Fighters can't retreat unless the carrier can dock them. Makes sense. Fighters. Here's an example of fighters. I think only the Terrans have fighters. They're small little tiny ships. No shielding. They have a couple hull boxes. They have a weapon, whatever. They have a minimum speed of 5. And are they listed on here? They probably should be. There we go. So those are their power curves. Notice they never generate any action points or whatever. But their turn radius can go down to 0, so that's pretty cool. They can always turn as long as they're going 5. They don't have shield arcs. They take the damage directly. They don't have an FTL drive. And they can collide with their own race. But ships in the same, fighters in the same squadron do not collide with each other. And there's this idea that the near faster than light drive that you're combating at is creates these little pockets, and that's how you get collisions. And the reason you can't ram other ships and do damage, enemy ships and do damage, is because their FTL drive, their near faster than light drives are just a little different, so that they don't actually cause damage to each other when they slam into each other. But those using the same, I don't, it's some hand waving going on, whatever. But they didn't want ramming as a part of the game. When you fire at a fighter, you end up targeting an individual fighter in the squadron, not the whole squadron. And when a squadron is destroyed, when a fighter is destroyed, there's no explosion. Now, carriers and bases are allowed to deploy up to 4 fighter squadrons each. And they are able to transfer power to their fighters. The fighter groups, if there are no carriers or bases, they can't get APs this way. Their charge bar yellow boxes can passively charge during their power phases, so that they can charge their weapon up using the normal procedure. When a carrier or friendly base gets an AP, it can spend it to give to a fighter group. And that can either actively charge the yellow box, but only one box on the counter. So only one of the fighters gets charged up by that. Or they can pull the entire squadron's turn radius closer, or they can enable a side slip for the entire fighter squadron. You have to be within 6 hexes of the CV or base and cannot be in an asteroid or nebula. Planets, nebula, and asteroids can block it just as they would with fire. Okay, missiles. Unlike other weapons, when a missile is fired, it doesn't immediately resolve. Instead, the missile counters are placed on the board. A missile can only be fired when the ship is in the firing arc of the missile launcher and the target is within range of the firing ship. The target of each missile is announced. Everybody knows it, and the number of the missile should be written on the target ship. You can see where that gets cluttered. The missile may only ever hit that target and it'll pass through any other units. If it's targeted against a fighter squadron, the specific fighter is not chosen until the missile hits, so you cannot target other missiles with missiles, which is not really a big deal because only the Talon have missiles, I think. Missiles are smart, unlimited fuel, and they track towards their target until they hit or destroy. If they track independently of their firing ship and are not removed, if the ship is destroyed, if the target leaves battle or is destroyed, the missile continues to move straight forward. You can select a new target for it using, you'll see, an AP, essentially. Missiles move during the movement step of a player's turn and are treated like other ships. They can move in any order. They have a speed of 6 always. They have a turn radius of 0. They cannot side slip. They don't need to. The firing player may move a missile as he sees fit as long as he chooses the hex closer to the target. They cannot cause the map to float. If they go flying off the map, they're gone. When a missile enters the same hex as its target, it hits and does 2 damage to the shield arc as if it's a weapon, basically. This happens during movement. A missile fired at its target at range 1 would immediately detonate because it moves, I guess. I don't know. Does the launch send it a hex out? it may send it a hex out. I think it throws it 1 hex out. An adjacent hex, yeah. That's why. If a missile moves into the same hex as a non-targeted ship, it just ignores it. Missiles can be shot down. If they take 3 or more points of damage, they're destroyed. If they take less than 3 points of damage, they're flipped to their damaged side, which just means if they take any additional amount of damage, they'll be destroyed. They don't deal explosion damage when they're destroyed, but they can receive explosion damage, like if a ship explodes or something. If multiple missiles are receiving damage from an explosion, it only applies to one of them, like with the fighters. Somehow the near FTL dampens the effect on all of them. Hey, no suicide shuttle type tactics from SFB, blowing up and destroying the entire. Damaged missiles still do their 2 points of damage when they hit the target, and destroyed missiles don't count towards victory at all. Which is good, they're just bullets. Okay, if you have a functioning missile launcher, you can spend an AP to select a new target for any one missile. The new target must be an enemy ship within the firing arc and range of the redirecting ship's missile launcher. And the missile doesn't have to be anywhere in particular. And when this happens, now the missile moves and goes after another ship. If the new missile target is already in the same hex as the missile, boom, it hits, and you roll a random arc. Bases, that's a dreadnought, not a base. Here's a base. The biggie with these is that they don't have movement, but they have a base rotation. The speed number in their power curve is the speed that they rotate. Rather than moving, they just turn 1 hex clockwise each time they get an action. You can adjust it up or down by 1 in the power phase, and they're going to be represented on the chart, I assume, right here. And you can see they always have 6 action points. It's just a question of how fast you want this thing to spin. You may want to slow that down because you got a weak shield or something like that. It's kind of weird about the bases is they still have that front, back, left, right facing on a hex grid, which means there's some weird shit. Are the shields the same size? 2, 4, 6, 7, 2, 4, 6, 7, yeah. So, whatever. Just deal with it, I guess. Bases are not able to collide with friendly ships because they don't have a drive. Some ships are able to dock. Okay. A couple of special weapons. Both races have their own special weapon. Ooh, I gotta swap batteries again. Talons have a wave motion gun and uses this symbol. What it does is you roll, goes 4 hexes out, you roll a die, and a hit will displace the target ship and cause damage. 10 points of damage, which is a lot. You draw a straight edge from the center of the firing ship through and beyond the center of the target hex. The ship will be displaced 1 hex away from the target ship without changing facing. If the target ship has a turn radius marker, it's shifted along with it. Turn radiuses get moved with the ship when necessary at other times too, like side slips. If a fighter is somehow hit by this, the entire squadron gets knocked back. The damage isn't resolved until after the shift. First, if there's a collision, and a number of other things, they all take place before the damage is resolved. And nothing too exciting there. 10 points of damage is a lot, though. Let's look at the next one, the fusion cannon. This fires a cone, hitting all targets in its firing arc and range. You roll the die separately for each target hit by it, and it depends on the range and the number rolled. And you can hit your own ships inadvertently this way. The order of the damage to be resolved is done first by the ship owner. You can't target this at just your own ships, but you can accidentally hit your own ships you can knowingly hit your own ships as long as you're targeting a real ship. Fighters are too small and agile to be damaged by the fusion cannon. This is good because otherwise fighters would just get wiped out, but missiles are not. Although it does say it only damages all ships, so I don't know. Doesn't actually specify one way or the other there. Okay. Docking and landing. I would say missiles are affected, but unless I can find something that says otherwise. Docking and landing. Docking is usually either a carrier or a base and is only allowed for a scenario objective or to allow fighters to retreat from the battle aboard a CV. A ship can't retreat aboard a CV. Planets can also be landed on, depending on the scenario allowing it. Okay, docking. When you move the ship into the same hex as the base or planet and remove the ship from the game. Docking cannot cause a collision. A transport may not dock with a base or land on a planet unless it's moving speed 1. Fighters can dock with a carrier or base when moving at any speed. And fighters may not undock from a carrier or base except by scenario roll. Normally the fighters are deployed in the scenario. There's no rules for launch, no reloads, anything like that in here. Fighter squadron retreats. If you want to retreat with a fighter squadron, you have to get yourself on a carrier first. The fighter is probably out of the game once it docks, so the only reason to do this, again, there's no repairs or anything like that, is to get off the board. If the carrier is destroyed with docked fighters on board it, the fighters are also counted as destroyed for the scenario victory conditions. Terrain, there's asteroids, planets, and nebulae. They're printed on the backs of some of the ship counters. This is, I don't remember, that's probably like a nebula generally. There's some asteroids. You have a bunch of different things that you can use. If there's terrain being used in the scenario, you pick an appropriate asteroid or nebula, checking to make sure that the ship on the reverse side is not being used in the scenario. The terrain doesn't move in the course of a battle, but when the floating map needs to be shifted, it will move with it, and it can fall off the scenario. There's a design your own scenario section, which allows you to select and place terrain in custom games. And ships that are destroyed by the terrain count as losses for victory points. For planets, any missile or ship beside a landing transport moving into the same hex is just destroyed. Adjacent ships take explosion damage as normal. Planets have some special characteristics. They're not harmed by the explosion. They cannot... damn tobacco. They cannot be targeted unless specified by the scenario roll. They can block fire. And missiles already fired continue to track to a ship blocked by a planet, but they're still destroyed if they moved into the planet's hex, and they will have to move into that hex if it's the shortest distance, the only shortest distance to that ship. So you can cause the planet to defend you. To see if a planet is blocking fire, you use a straight edge, yeah. Okay. Asteroids. When a ship moves into a hex with an asteroid counter, it takes 1 damage on that shield arc. Now, fighters and missiles are able to slip around the asteroids without taking damage. If you can move at a certain speed, less than your power, you can generate shield reinforcements and thus take no sort of permanent damage when blowing through the asteroids, and that's your navigational deflectors if you want such a thing to exist. Whenever a ship's in the same hex as a nebula, all of its shields are down. You cannot, any shield reinforcements are destroyed. The shields come back online as soon as you leave the nebula, though. So you don't actually lose any shield boxes, you just aren't protected by them. Nebula don't affect missiles. Asteroids and nebula affect weapon targeting systems. If you have to fire into or through an asteroid or nebula, you subtract 1 for every die roll that would pass through. Check these weapons, make sure, yeah, low is always bad. Opposite of SFB there, of course. If a die roll is less than 1, the shot completely misses. The fusion cannon may be modified differently for ships that it would hit. And that's for each one. Power transmissions are blocked by asteroids and nebulae as well, like from a carrier or base to a fighter. Black holes. If you collide with a black hole, you're destroyed. But explosion damage still happens. Woo, how's that work? Black holes block fire just like a planet. I think that bothers me. The explosion damage being dealt. It just depends on where they're adjacent. They didn't want that complexity, I guess. When firing, if the target ship is closer to the black hole than the firing ship, you subtract 1 from the die roll due to interference with the black hole. So if you're firing towards the black hole, it warps your shot. Ships may not deploy within 2 hexes of the black hole at the beginning of the scenario, I guess. Once per round after the power phase, all ships, including bases, must shift 1 hex closer to the black hole. Use a straight edge. If the straight edge is along the hex spine, the ship's owner determines the destination. Any collision damage is immediately resolved. Ships do not change facing. Wormholes. There might be wormholes that allow you to retreat from the battle without spooling up your FTL drive. And it gives you a retreat. Okay. And he talks about why he doesn't think vector movement is particularly necessary, and that he doesn't like most vector movement systems, because most vector movement systems don't really handle it properly. Like, you can't use a simplified vector movement system. You have to keep track of the vector that the ship is traveling in separately from the direction the ship's facing, which is entirely true. And I've seen some systems handle it correctly. Obviously, attack vector does. That also handles 3-dimensional movement and rotations within the axis, and is just incredibly complicated. But I've seen other systems that work just fine, where you can rotate the ship and apply different vectors and do vector addition. So I don't see 2-dimensional vector movement as being terribly complicated. You didn't want to do it. Okay. I mean, I played a lot of SFB. It always disturbed me. The drives are kind of magical, you know. Same thing applies here. But yeah, there are some other things in here that are a little bit. So let's talk a little about scenarios. There's a bunch of scenarios in here. Wow, we're over the hour already. But I think I may well not play scenarios. I may play one. But what I'm interested in is the campaign game. Now, I was most interested in doing this in conjunction with SE4X, but I think what I'm going to do instead is play it with the Empire War map. So there are different ways that you can win the game, win a particular battle. A normal battle is last ship standing. Whoever's on the battlefield wins. And battles do not immediately end once a major objective is complete. The battle continues unless a player concedes and surrenders all his ships or whatever. Planetary invasion. You select one side to be the invader, the other side is the defender. The invader must add at least 2 transports to the ships he'll deploy at the start of the battle. These will be part of his total ship points for victory. The defender takes the planet terrain counter and places it in his setup area before ship deployment. And the objective is to land transports on the planet. And then there's degrees of victory there. Orbital conquest, both sides select a planet and place it on their respective setup area. And both sides add at least 2 transports to the ships they'll have. And the goal is to land your transports on the enemy planet while defending your own. I don't know if we'll have anything like that. Convoy intercept. Oh, the campaign game is to play a series of battles and score completely. This is not what I'm actually looking at. Convoy intercept. One side is the convoy, the other side is the attacker. The convoy player has to add a transport to the ships he'll deploy, and the convoy has to, the transport has to be protected until it's ready to jump to FTL. And you use the convoy duty scenario for that. Wormhole blockade, you play wormholes instead of a convoy intercept. Here, the attacker's trying to stop the convoy from getting through the wormhole. Escort zone. Transport must be protected until it goes to FTL. I don't know what the difference here is between those two. Oh, both sides have a transport. Okay, great. Base assault, the base is worth more points if it's destroyed than it would normally. Priority target, one ship's made more valuable. There's a random terrain placement system. Okay, so the thing I wanted to get to was the Empire War mode, and then I also want to briefly discuss some of the other rules here, which is playing with SE4X, which I don't think I'm going to do just because I'll tell you why when we get there. Okay, so victory in the Empire War is to take the other player's home planet, which will be present on the board. Okay. There'll be front line markers placed on the board in the start space in each sector. And I don't know where that... Oh, look, it's Hoth. And Farpoint. Let's take words from other games. Yeah, the start's just down the middle here. And in each sector, you'll have this. You're going to start with a bunch of points to build your initial ships, 2,000 points. And you may use some of them to purchase additional bases, but the first 3 bases are free. Bases are assigned at the start of the game and cannot be purchased later. Bases are assigned to specific conflict zones within a sector. They may not be moved after the start of the game. Initial assignment of bases is done in secret using the Empire War tracking sheet. Is that this or something else? I don't have the something else, so it better be this. I don't see how they can be done secretly then. They can only be assigned to conflict zones that do not have a frontline marker in them, and they must be on your faction side of the frontline marker. The conflict zone may not have the dice symbol, which is used for randomizing the terrain. One base may be assigned to a player's home planet. Must be assigned to a player's home planet. After base assignment, both sides reveal their base placement. Yeah, there's got to be... I don't know. You can write it down secretly. Once they're revealed, they're known from then on. Use objective markers and or Empire War tracking sheet, which again I don't know where that is, to track the placement of bases. If more than 3 bases are deployed, use any spare counter to mark their location. At least one of every ship class must be purchased, and you may not buy more than 5 times as many of one ship class as you have of any other class. The exception is the Terrans allowed an infinite number of fighters, assuming they have places to put them. Extra points that are not spent are carried over into the game. For the first turn of the game, at least 500 ship points worth of ships must be assigned to the Fleet Reserve. I don't see a space for that. The rest of the purchase ships are put in sectors. I don't know if there's some... Let me stop and see if there's some sheet that I don't have, that I haven't seen. Next I come... Back here, this thing. It says Empire War ship list, which actually takes care of each ship, and I guess you could get the fleets in that. It's not quite what they're saying it's called, so I don't know. But we're not too worried about it. You could just write it on a scrap of paper. Okay, so where are we here? Initial ship assignment, at least 500 there. After the initial ship building and assignment, a battle is fought in every sector as if it were a battle phase. After these are completed, then we go into normal strategic turns. First, you're able to buy new ships. They go into the fleet reserve, which I can just put off to the side or something, I guess. One battle is fought in each, although honestly you can't because there aren't enough ship counters to track everything. I'm thinking of like my Federation and Empire board. I could grab ship counters from SE4X and just pile them off to the side to use for this. Or I could just use a piece of paper and record what's there. New ships are purchased and ships that enter the fleet reserve during the previous strategic turn are repaired. Ships are assigned then to one of the 4 sectors or to the fleet reserve. And then a battle is fought in each conflict zone and the front line of each conflict zone is adjusted. Okay. Each conflict zone in a sector has a point value for each side, designated by the faction logos. So this is worth 100 or 125 production. I think this is the Talon, and this is, I don't know why. I don't know. I don't think that makes sense. You would think the 150 would go to the person who uses that as his home, but we'll see. It's not absolutely clear. So anyway, you add the corresponding point value for each current conflict zone to your treasury. Oh, I see why. Okay, so if the front line is here, the Earth only gets 75 points, whereas 150 are produced for the Talon, if one of the front line markers is there. So at the midway point, each side gets 100 points for each sector. So each side's getting 400 points. As you advance towards the other side, you reduce his points and increase your own. Well, actually, you increase your own. You don't reduce his, which is kind of weird, but whatever. Until you get to the home itself, which is where things get kind of ugly. All right. Then you can use the ship points in the treasury to purchase new ships. These new ships can be deployed immediately during the upcoming ship assignment phase. Unspent points are carried over to the next strategic round. If you have 5 times as many ships of one class as you do any other class, you may not purchase any more ships of the excess class. You may not buy more ships of the excess class until you get under that 5-to-1 limit. Now, you could get knocked above, you could get knocked so that you have like 7-to-1 or something. You just can't buy more of them. So you could take losses that give you too many of one class. If you don't have at least one ship of each class in the fleet reserve or active fleet, you have to make sure that you have one of each class before you can buy on any classes that you already have ships. And you can scrap ships at this point, but you don't get anything for it, so I don't know why you do it. Okay, ships that are in the fleet reserve in the previous strategic round are repaired. They lose all their hull damage and critical damage that's still in effect. Okay, so you have to keep track of what damage is available on each ship, which means simple counters aren't going to work. You need it on here, or you need to record it here, I guess, where they list the hull and criticals. Or some other piece of paper where you could detail things better. Any destroyed fighters in a squadron are restored, i.e. if part of the squadron is still there, you get to repair them. These repairs cost no ship points, and newly repaired ships may be deployed in the ship assignment phase. Damaged bases repair 1 hull point, and all critical damage still in effect. Bases are harder to... Well, bases are going to repair slowly, but they're not in your reserve. They're sitting on the board. So you may need to screen them or something. Ship assignment phase, you calculate your active fleet logistics points. You determine your minimum logistic points per sector. And then you secretly assign where your ships are going to be. And this is very similar to how SFB handles the assignments, except there you can actually surrender completely and everything. You have to assign a number of ships to each sector every strategic round. The minimum is calculated during logistics points, which represent the difficulty coordinating a war across the vastness of space. Okay. Here's the number of logistic points each fleet has. And the minimum amount of logistic points in a sector depends on how many ships you have that are not in the fleet reserve. This is your active fleet. However big your active fleet is, you have to put a certain number of points in that sector. If you have none total, you've just surrendered and you lose. For every frontline counter on your home planet, you subtract 1 from your minimum LP per sector because you have to defend your home more. If the war has pushed from a sector to your doorstep, you have more resources with which to defend yourself. Ships that are assigned to a sector may remain in that sector. They can move to an adjacent sector, or they can go back to the fleet reserve. They can't jump sectors. Like you can't jump from here to here. I don't know if there's a wraparound, though. I would guess. I don't know. I don't think so. If more than one frontline marker is over a given home planet, players still assign ships to the individual sectors those frontline markers initially represented. These ships are combined during the battle above a home planet. The minimum LP per sector must be satisfied before the battle phase can begin. If assigning a ship to the fleet reserve would prevent a player from meeting the minimum LP per sector, then the ship may not be assigned to the fleet reserve. If it is possible due to fleet losses that you may not be able to meet the minimum LP per sector, in this case, just enough ships from further than one sector away may be assigned to satisfy the minimum as closely as possible. So you are allowed to jump if you must. After ship assignment phase, a battle is fought in every current conflict zone. Battles are resolved starting in the Antares sector at the top and moving your way down. If there are any frontline markers on the home planet, the player with the most LPs may decide which of those battles is resolved first. Until a home planet has a frontline marker, there will always be 4 battles in each strategic round. Battles involving ships from both sides that are assigned to a given sector. The ships in the fleet reserve are not involved in the battle. You reveal which forces you put in there. You may decide not to engage the enemy and forfeit the battle. You take no ship losses, but the frontline moves against you. The player with the fewest LP assigned in the sector gets to decide whether or not they're engaging first. If you're tied for LP, you must decide to the person who chooses is selected at random. Then you fight a normal last ship standing, unless it's above a planet. Now, the most ships you can have in a battle is limited to the counter mix that you have available. If you have 2 games of Talon, you can have more ships. How about that? The frontline marker advances 1 zone towards the losing side's home planet if the winner gets a great or devastating victory. I didn't go into the victory conditions here. I don't know where they are. Nope. They're in this book. Great. Let's look at the victory conditions. And this is Rule 20, which is... bunches of rules here, like jury rigging, that apply to specific scenarios, reinforcement, stuff like that. But basically, if your ship points, you total the ship point values of ships destroyed on either side, and you divide the loser by the winner, and if you got greater than 3 times, you get a devastating victory. Greater than 1.5, you get a great victory, and less than 1.5, you get a minor victory. Let's see what the effects are here. Greater devastating, you move automatically. If you get a minor victory and you didn't lose any ships, you get to move the marker 1. Otherwise, the front line marker just stays in place. You may want to lose battles in order to prevent this from moving forward and costing you production and possible loss of the game eventually. If neither side has ships remaining in the battle, both players lose and the frontline marker stays the same place. The frontline marker is not advanced beyond a planet unless the winning player also controls the planet in that conflict zone. Fighters without a base or CV in the same conflict zone are considered stranded. Each base or CV can carry their fighters. Special towing ships may retrieve them. Stranded fighters go to the fleet reserve. They've gotten pulled away. If they have a friendly base in a given conflict zone and no friendly CV at the end of combat, and the frontline marker did not move, they may remain with the base and stay assigned to the sector for the subsequent round, even if they can't be carried, I guess. Okay. Temporary repairs. Every ship's shields are restored between battles, but none of the damaged hull is repaired, including destroyed fighters. All critical damage with the repairable damage icon and damage faster than light drives will be repaired. Other critical damage, such as destroyed weapons group, are not repaired. Damaged ships can be assigned to the fleet reserve for repairs in the next round. Now, you might want to cheat with this a little bit, because there's the concept of jury rigging. Some ships' weapons groups may be jury rigged. They're designated with jury rig counters on their broken wire side, and at the end of every impulse, a jury rigged weapon group may attempt to repair it, and then it flips back to its wires connected. It can be fired once. After it's fired, it's again damaged in the jury rigging. Possibly I want to make that a possibility or a certainty in between battles. I'm not sure. I could just leave it as it is and make it simpler. Some terrain has a pattern of terrain listed on it, which would be in the battle. Except for planets, there use terrain placement rules by the initiative player. Once this terrain pattern may be placed, who's initiative in this? I don't know. These will be battles at key choke points. Some conflict zones have dice on them. Then you roll and get random terrain. This is basically indicating an area where there's no actual necessary terrain, but you might end up fighting your battle over some terrain that doesn't matter terribly. Okay, if there's a planet, the battle above a planet, you control the planet on your side of the front line marker. You will not lose the front line there unless the planet is taken. Battles fought above planets follow planetary invasion battle mode with the following exceptions. To take control of a planet, you must land 2 or more transports on a planet. So you got to buy some. If the player owner cannot deploy his transports in his setup area at the start of the game, he can only bring them in as reinforcements. If a friendly base is guarding a planet, enemy transports cannot land until the base is destroyed. This means both the planet owner and the attacker can field and land transports on the planet. The owner is landing additional defense troops. If a player does not engage and the other player has at least 2 transports, landing on the planet is automatic. If a transport lands on the planet, no matter what happens after that, the transport is considered to have survived the battle and goes in the fleet reserve to recover. Now, there's a concept of Empire War lifetime score. Basically, each time you play, if you win, you get some points, and whoever, and you just collect up this running total of points, and whatever it means, it means. Okay. Couple of optional rules: random ship selection. You throw ships into a cup and pick them. Give you a really random scenario. Another option is you can play battles against your same race if you wish to do so. And it's kind of light on that, but whatever. All right. What about playing it with SE4X? Well, there's a bunch of stuff that's not used from SE4X. The Talons start with frigates instead of scouts because they don't have scouts. The Terrans use one set of pieces. These pieces are exactly the same for the 2 forces, so that doesn't really matter. Shipyards are non-combat ships. They have no combat ability. I guess one of the biggest things, light cruisers don't exist in SE4X, so now you start using ship counters that you wouldn't normally have in this game, like minesweepers. Raiders aren't a special type of ship. The cloaking device is included on destroyers. It just feels kind of fake to me to use this. Yeah, what do they have? They use, you still use the technology and all that, and all those special rules in there. It's just now you have a combat system for it, but it's not a combat system for SE4X. You can play SE4X as the Talon campaign with a lot of the rules for SE4X, and you end up with a different research chart that you have to work your way towards and getting all those things. And to me, it's kind of like, I'm not sure I really want that. I like the idea of taking all of SE4X with all its complexity and maybe expanding it further and creating new weapon systems that you can research and everything. That's not what happens here. Instead, what happens is you've got these two species, these two races that are largely defined, and you can do some work on them, but like carriers, for example, they still become only an earth weapon, stuff like that. So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna play the Empire War map and work that out. I may make some really horrible decisions, but I'm not really necessarily looking for a balanced or long campaign. I'm looking to really see how the combat system works over the course of a few scenarios, and I feel like I'd rather play the campaign game than just, here's some predetermined scenarios. I've never been a big fan of, yep, let's play this scenario. It's okay with historical battles, but it just doesn't do it for me with the sort of generic space combat type model, although this is not that. All right, at least that's my intention right now. We'll see if I keep to that.